welcome to the first episode of the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. So you may recognize Jesse and myself from our very successful, our account that we have on the Instagram. Possibly even recognize us from our YouTube videos. We've been online for a couple of years now, and we're really excited to be branching out into the podcasting arena. Today, our main topic that we're going to be focusing on is going to be small craft angling, specifically canoes and kayaks. We will be doing another episode later on in the future about fishing from aluminum boats and John boats and whatnot. But today, we're focusing on those truly small watercrafts, those canoes and kayaks. At the end of the episode, we're also going to have a question and answer. So we posted on our Instagram account a request for some questions. We will be answering at least some of them. And everyone who submits a question will actually be entered into essentially a raffle. We're going to have a giveaway for the episode. And so be sure to listen to the end of the episode to see if your question gets answered right here on the podcast. And also at every subsequent week, make sure you listen to the end of the episode to see if you're the one who actually wins that raffle of whatever the prize giveaway is going to be.
And I haven't told Andrew the prize yet, but the prize this week is pretty good. Andrew himself will want to win it, but he can't. It's against the rules.
I did submit a question. Am I in the raffle?
No.
All right, fine. That's fair. So we're going to start the episode, though, with an interesting fishing fact, which Jesse has prepared, and I have no clue what it is, and I'm a little scared.
Yeah, so I thought it would be interesting if every week we had an interesting fishing fact, and we didn't tell the other person so that we couldn't prepare.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So I thought today, since it's winter, our interesting fishing fact could be about lake trout, one of Andrew's favorite fish.
I've caught 3 of them.
Nothing this size, though. So the interesting fishing fact is actually going to be about the record size lake trout. Now, this is very interesting. Just a guess. What do you think is the IGFA all tackle world record lake trout? How many pounds?
I know of guys who caught 60s. I know a guy who caught like an 80. So I'm going to say...
You know a guy who caught an 80.
He caught it in, I believe he says it was 80. Whether or not it was true or not, I'm going to say it's around the 80 mark.
Okay. So the current IGFA all world tackle record for lake trout is 72 pounds.
Okay, so he was a liar.
Yeah. And that's the biggest lake trout recognized caught on a line that was actually sent in and verified. And that was caught in 1995. And it's very interesting because that's not the biggest lake trout that they've seen. That's the biggest one that they've caught. Okay. So now, like, a lake trout it's a salmonoid or a char. Like, it's in that family. They all look kind of similar. Yeah. Now, you've caught salmon 25, 30 pounds. Imagine having a fish literally 3 times bigger than that. Like, it is a giant, giant fish, right? And the cool thing is that 72 pounder that was officially caught as the record, that's nothing. That's literally nothing. So a few years ago, this is what they think is the world's biggest lake trout. It was caught in a gill net in Great Bear Lake in Canada, and it weighed 83 pounds. And I'm going to show you a picture of it, Andrew, so you can react to that fish. Look at the size of that. Now, to describe this fish, how would you describe that?
Girthy.
It's
the patented girthy.
It puts a giant trophy muskie to shame.
It looks
massive.
That thing looks like a catfish, though. The way that belly is just like squishing out between his hands holding that,
it's absolutely
that's a fat fish.
Giant. And that they got in a gill net. And that's not the biggest one, okay? That's the biggest recent one. So back in 1961 in Saskatchewan, they caught another one in a gill net. Now, this is like not as verified because it was back in the olden days. 102 pounds. 102 pound lake trout.
Oh, my word.
Isn't that insane?
Imagine catching through the ice and you're in a hut and the hole that's in the hut is too small.
You literally need like a 2-foot hole to get that thing through. Now, to bring it a little closer, the Ontario record lake trout is 63 pounds, 12 ounces. The length of that fish, 51.5 inches, 32.8 inches around in girth. That's a giant fish.
Wow.
51.5 inches. That's like a giant muskie.
That's crazy.
That's a giant muskie.
That's crazy.
And thick. And the last interesting fishing fact about lake trout is, which I'm sure some of us may know, but lake trout live a long time. Lake trout can live up to 60 years. Imagine how many lures that those fish have seen over the years. or maybe haven't because they got that big by being smart.
Yeah.
But I know we may not have 83-pound lake trout around us, but we do have a lot of really good lake trout fisheries, like Lake Simcoe has a lot of giants in it, and a lot of other lakes. But if you ever catch an 83-pounder, tag us in your picture for sure. And that ends interesting fishing fact of the week.
So that was I like that. That was good. So the main topic of the episode is going to be fishing out of a canoe and kayak. So I just wanted to open up first with a little bit of history. So I figured we focus a little bit on canoes first, and then kayaks, and kind of mix between.
Sounds good.
So the canoe has been around for thousands and thousands of years. So they have some of the first canoes were the dugout canoe, which was made from one solid tree that they would literally chisel out the inside of. And that has been used for thousands of years. They've found some from like 8200 BC, these canoes.
Wow.
Apparently is what they dated them to. There's bark canoes, which a lot of the natives had used. And then there's skin canoes. That was like animal skin stretched over top of wood frames. Cedar strip was a bit more recent. Aluminum, fiberglass, Kevlar, carbon fiber, and a variety of different plastics they've made canoes out of. So a lot of that advancement had happened in more recent years, but canoes have been around for a very long time. So it's one of those crafts that they have really perfected and continue to improve upon, which really impresses me. The fact that you can get a canoe made now, or like a company like Swift Canoe, or any of these companies who are keep pushing forward their advancements, and these canoes are like even better, crazy light, super stable. Like it's so insane light. What they can do with canoes.
Yeah.
For something that's been around and been improved upon time and time again for thousands of years, they're still making them better. I think that's awesome. The kayak is actually a kind of a subgenre of canoe. So the difference between a canoe and a kayak, if you're not aware, is a kayak has a deck, essentially. It's a covered deck on a kayak. So the canoe is open top, the kayak, it comes over top. There are now different, again, subgenres of kayaks. You're going to have like a sit on top kayak, different things. You have the sit in, they have the ones that have the full skirt, so you're basically like fully protected no matter what happens to you. But there's different versions, but essentially a kayak is a closed deck. So a sit on top kayak, you're actually sitting on top of the deck, essentially. And the one thing I want to mention from them as well, so they originated from Greenland, supposedly. The original ones were made out of skin stretched over a wooden frame. A lot of the Inuit had used those. And yes, nowadays they've really improved upon those like a lot as well in recent years. So I just wanted to start off with kind of the difference between the two and history of both. But I want to go into some questions here for Jesse. When did you first fish out of a canoe or a kayak?
I first fished out of a canoe probably with my dad, the Kawartha Lakes. Yeah, I remember. I was excited. I was really excited because we grew up trout fishing, stream trout fishing, or fishing from shore, like, when we were young, fishing for sunfish off the dock, stuff like that. So my dad he used to have canoes growing up, but I guess when he got married, he never got one. So we rented a canoe at a provincial park. I remember. I was really excited. It was one of those big red plastic Coleman canoes, those big super heavy ones, but they're stable. We went out there, caught a few bass, some sunfish. It was exciting. But I think most of the time we fished canoe, it was at your cottage when we went out on that river and just tried our best to catch pike and not fall in the water.
Yeah, that was out of my grandpa's old Coleman canoe.
I love those.
I'd classic Coleman.
I'd pick one up again, 100%.
If I didn't have to carry it somewhere, I'd run a Coleman. They're super stable, super durable, and super nostalgic for me, just because I grew up fishing out of that canoe.
Yeah. And as for kayaks, I got a kayak a while. I've fished in a few kayaks over the years, but I picked one up. I actually, it's a funny story how I got my first legitimate kayak. Is a sit on top, a 12.5 foot sit on top fishing kayak. And one of our friends said to me, he's like, I got this kayak. It's in my garage, just sitting there. Do you want it? And I was like, yeah, how much do you want for it? And he's like, I want $400. And at the time I was like, it wasn't really the kayak that I really wanted. And it was all beat up. And I said, you know what? I'll give you $200 for it. And he's like, no, I need $400. He's like, I'll tell you what, you take me trout fishing. If you can get me on a bigger than, he held out his hands. He's like, a bigger than this big fish. He's like, I'll give you the kayak for $200. So it happened to be, just after trout opener. So I took him out trout fishing on this creek, and I literally just hooked him up with some dew worms, and it was a perfect day. It was like early May. There's still a lot of big bows up in the creeks. We found a nice deep hole, saw a bunch of rainbows swimming around, and it had just rained. The water was like, a little bit, nice and murky. Put on a big dew worm, and I chucked it out, and I was like, all right, just hang on. And he caught a few, but he caught one that was really big. It was a steelhead, at least I'd say 10 pounds, which for him was probably one of the biggest fish he's ever caught in his life. Yeah. And as soon as we got home, he's like, all right, $200. So that was that. And I actually ended up selling it to a guy on Instagram. I don't know if he's still using it, but I actually won a kayak at the kayak meetup last year. I haven't picked it up yet, but I do have plans on getting a pedal drive kayak in 2024. So that's my plan. But yeah, Andrew, cool. He doesn't want a pedal, so.
No, I prefer I just got an aluminum boat, which again, we'll talk about in another episode another time. But yeah, I do own a canoe, which we fished out of that canoe for a very long time. Yeah, so I got a Swift canoe. I was, I believe, 14 years old when I bought that. I'd saved up for years. And I bought that canoe. It's a 16-foot Algonquin by Swift. And yeah, that thing, I bought it for a portage up into Algonquin Park because I wanted something light enough that I could go. That year, it is a limited run for that canoe, actually. It's made of golden glass, which they don't use anymore. So it is a mixture of Kevlar and fiberglass. So you get the fiberglass canoes are known for their durability. It has lots of flexibility. So you're bumping into a rock or a log or whatnot, it'll kind of flex with that and won't crack. Kevlar is extremely light, but is a lot, because it's so rigid, it can crack a lot easier. So it's not as durable, especially when they were first out. So the golden glass, weaving those two together, you had something that still had a lot of flexibility in that canoe still, but has a lot more rigidity and a lot of lightness because of the Kevlar. So I think it weighs just over 50 pounds or something like that.
Yeah.
For a 16-foot canoe.
And we've hit a bunch of rocks with it over the years.
Oh, I used to take that thing, like, I used to go and run down the Beaver River when I lived on Lake Simcoe. And it's like, oh, look, a rapids. And it's like 2 inches deep and it's like, yeah, like scraping over rocks.
Yeah.
Oh, I had to like buff it out after.
We put our canoes through some torture, especially my sports Pel. We'll get more into that, but my sports Pel, it looks like it's 10 years old and it's only 2 years old. Some people are like, how long have you had that? I'm like, a year and a half, and it's just covered in dents and scratches. And I'm like, you know what? I bought this to fish out of it, not to keep it pretty.
So we'll talk a little bit on the pros and cons, kind of general right now, of canoe versus kayak. So depending on what you're looking to do with it, again, we're mainly fishing out of ours. Some people like it just to paddle around and goof off on. We're looking at it more so from the side of if you want to fish out of it. Even if you want it for multi-use, what's going to be useful when you are fishing out of it. So for me, I really like canoes. I don't have much experience fishing out of kayaks, in all honesty, but the canoe I really like because when I think fishing, most of the time growing up, it was camping as well. Mm-hmm. So to go camping, you can take another person with you. You can go by yourself in a canoe. You can, load it up. It's a full open bottom, so you can put whatever you want in there. You can load it up, take a bunch of gear. Like you and I went camping in my canoe, and like we had that thing loaded. Yeah. And it's amazing what they can handle, especially depending on the model you get, what they're designed for. But canoes can take a lot more gear, I would say, than a kayak.
Oh, 100%. So just to add to that, so like my sports Pel is a 14-foot wide transom. I have an 800-pound capacity. So even a very expensive, like a Hobie Pro Angler, it's not even close to that. Or like the average kayak is like even a big expensive kayak. You're usually maxing out at like 400 or 500 pounds for capacity. My canoe is 800. So you can see you could have two guys in, like me and Andrew, like two guys, all of our equipment, too many fishing rods, just, propane, like everything. Yep. And we're fine. We're not even close to maxing out the 800-pound capacity. So for camping, like, yeah, guys fish out of, they'll go with the kayaks to go camping, but
you can 100% camp out of it, but
it's not as ideal.
Yeah. Not if you're kayak and you want to, you're portaging around and stuff like that, you can definitely do a kayak. You're forced to pack light, which is going to help you. But canoe, you can pack just as light in a canoe and still use that. So I would say that overall canoes are more, they have a broader range as to what you can do with it. Is it going to be the best at any of those things? No.
Yeah.
It's the best at carrying gear around. That was their intended purpose when they were first like invented
and
thousands of years
two
ago.
guys. I think that's the biggest
multiple
thing.
People.
Yeah.
You can get canoes that we used to hold whole war parties of people, and there's 30 guys in a canoe all paddling, ripping across a lake. Like they traverse the Great Lakes in these things. But again, like that's not what you're going to be going on buying.
Well, I mean,
I hope
if you
not.
buy a war party canoe to fish, then believe me, I'll be paddling the other way furiously. But to add to that, so like you said, canoes can do a lot of things compared to a kayak, but kayaks are better at some things than canoes.
100%.
Like I would not want to take my canoe, like me and Andrew have been in my canoe and his canoe too in Lake Ontario on a calm day. But in a kayak, you can go way out on the lake because if you take water on, it's fine. It just goes through the scupper holes. But on a canoe, you'll fill up and you'll die.
So that's a good point. So scupper holes. What are scupper holes then?
So scupper holes are holes inside of your kayak, and they go right through the kayak to the bottom. So if any water comes in, like say you get a wave that comes in, which happens all the time.
And this is for a sit on top kayak style.
So water will come into your kayak, and then it just drains out the bottom. And it's great because like sometimes when you're on the lake, you're in some little waves and stuff, and once you have some experience being in bigger water, it's not actually dangerous. It can be, but water can come in your kayak and it will drain out. Canoes don't have scupper holes because if they did, they would sink.
So canoes, that's a very good point. So I've been in some pretty rough water. I have flipped my canoe multiple times. It's not something to really be like scared of, depending on what time of year it is. And what gear you want to, you're at risk of losing. But the canoe is not as stable in general as kayak, depending on the kayak, because you can get kayaks with the sit inside style, and freestyle kayaks are like 6 feet long. They for whitewater rafting. That's just for the sport of that. Again, that's something that's very like oriented to a certain sport, an event. You get other sit inside kayaks. They're a blast just to like paddle around in. I rented some of those up in Tobermory, going over the old shipwrecks. Like that was amazing to do that. And they're super easy to move, very mobile, a lot easier to paddle around in than a canoe.
Yeah.
But generally the sit inside style kayaks aren't ideal for fishing. There's no accessible storage really, because when you're fishing, you're going to have like probably multiple rods out. You're going to have a tackle box. There's no real place to have that on a sit inside kayak. Yeah. So generally when we're talking about fishing, it's going to be a sit on top style. There's the fishing models that have built-in rod racks. They have pedal drive. They have ones that you can fit a motor into. All these things that are geared to let you have the best fishing experience as a one-man crew on a boat. It's a fishing platform. You paddle around.
100%.
Awesome.
And a kayak, I'll say a pro for a kayak is it's much easier to fish in a kayak solo. So if you're in a canoe by yourself, unless you're fishing my canoe, which isn't really a canoe because it has a motor and a trolling motor on it, it's hard to paddle a canoe by yourself and fish. It's way easier to be in a kayak even if you're paddling because you're in the middle. It's a lot easier and safer and more stable.
Another thing I wanted to mention then with the canoes and kayaks, so with canoes specifically, there's a lot of different styles. So hull shape and design changes what it's good for. Is it good for stability? Is it good for taking a lot of weight? Is it good for tracking in the water? It's going to get blown around by wind, all these different things. But if you want to get more information on that, you can always do research on and see exactly what you really want in your canoe for what it's going to do. But I wanted to talk about the different transom styles. So you have the standard canoe that you can imagine is pointed on both ends. You can paddle it either way depending if you're by yourself or with two people in it to keep the weight balanced properly. And then you also have canoes where they're called a flat back or square back canoe. And you can mount, as a tiny little transom, you can mount like one motor on it. On Jesse's Sports Pal, he has the full transom canoe. So it's essentially the full width, almost the full width of the widest part of the canoe is exactly what it is at the back end. So he can actually fit his little 2.5 horse and trolling motor together on the back of this full transom.
Yeah, it's amazing.
At the same time, it sucks to paddle that canoe. Because of the square back, it doesn't like glide and cut through the water very well. So
and it's really wide.
It's really wide. It's stable. It's awesome. Like it's great to fish out of. If you're going to put a motor on it, I'd say get that. If you want something that you can also paddle, I wouldn't recommend getting a full transom back.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because like I get that question all the time. Like you wouldn't even understand how many people ask me questions about my Sports Pal at the lake, at the boat launch, on Instagram, on YouTube, all the time. Like, oh, which one should I get? Should I get this one or that one? What length should I get? You know, and like Andrew said, here's my advice: if you want a canoe and you want a Sports Pal and you're gonna paddle it 100% of the time, get the the pointed front and the back. If you're going to put a motor on it, but also would like to paddle it occasionally, the best probably overall one is I think they just call it the square stern.
Yeah.
It's not the wide transom. The square stern, you can put a trolling motor on the back, which a lot of people do, or you could put a little 2.5 or 3 horsepower on the back. That's great. But if you don't want to paddle at all, okay, you're buying this boat.
Hashtag lazy boys over here.
I call it fishing. You can put a trolling motor and a gas motor on the back of the wide transom.
Yeah.
I think the transom in the back is like 30 inches wide.
Yeah.
So we can have a trolling motor so we can fish standing up, and then we can use the gas motor to get from spot to spot. And I'll tell you the efficiency of that. This is one big pro and why I picked the Sports Pal over a kayak. Because like for the same amount of money I spent, I could have bought a nice pedal drive. Not really, but almost. But basically in a pedal drive, you have to be sitting down to pedal to move. Okay. I like standing up to fish because I fish shallow water bass fishing. I like to stand up. In my Sports Pal, I can stand up with one hand on the trolling motor and fish standing up as I'm moving. You can't do that in a kayak unless you have the auto drive system, which is like $9,000.
In a calm area, we can both stand up in that canoe and fish, which out of something that's portable for 2 people to stand up is awesome.
We're fishing in a 55-pound canoe and 2 guys, like how tall are you? 6'3"?
6'2".
6'2". Like we're not skinny either. Like we're decent sized guys, and we're both standing figure eighting for muskie in a tin 55-pound canoe. And I have
one of us catching a muskie on the figure 8.
Yeah. One of them netting it for him. But I think I've had maybe one scare where I thought I was going to tip in, and it was because of my fault. I've never been fishing and been like, oh, I feel like I'm unstable.
Yeah.
That canoe is literally like a floating platform. It's so wide. People are like, oh, can you get stabilizers on the side? I was like, don't bother. We're in Lake Ontario and big swells in that boat. No fear of it tipping over.
So I'm glad we're talking about your canoe, because I wanted to go into the different crafts you've actually owned a little bit. So your Sports Pal, like you said, we get a lot of information about it. You've already kind of talked about what is great about using it. But when you were buying it, what were you looking for when you chose, and what were some of the determining factors why you chose that model? Because you got the 14-foot full transom Sports Pal canoe. So like, what other research did you do that you opted out of other canoes, let's say, to choose that one?
Okay, so the reason I just talked about, I like standing. I knew I wanted a gas motor because like we've all been there with the trolling motor on a canoe, and you have the same thing as like people that drive Teslas. You have range anxiety. You're always checking the battery, like, oh, you know, like you can get a day out of a battery, no problem, if you're just trolling around while you're fishing. But to get from spot to spot, you need a gas motor.
Yeah.
You have a little tank of gas, you're like, I'm good. The battery will last all day when I'm fishing. And when I go from spot to spot, I'm not literally going 3 kilometers an hour, draining my battery, going like, 60, 70%. So I wanted to be able to stand. I wanted to have the ability to, it's a small boat, but I want to be able to run like 1 or 2 or 3 kilometers in whatever direction I want to get to spots that I want. But the options that I needed, because I have a small car, I have a Mazda 3.
Yeah. And
I live in a condo. So like I don't have a spot to park a boat. I don't have a hitch to pull a boat or a car big enough to pull a decent sized boat. So it had to be something that could fit on my roof racks. So my options right away are going to be these 3: a canoe, a flatback canoe, a pedal drive kayak, or an inflatable Zodiac boat. Now, they all have their place. The Zodiac boat is probably not the most popular in this area. I have seen a few people use them. I know there's a guy in Nova Scotia that follows us on Instagram that fishes out of a Zodiac, and man, he catches big stripers.
They're an amazing boat for their purpose.
Oh, 100%.
They're fantastic.
And they're not cheap if you get a good one. You can buy cheap ones, but I wouldn't. But it would also be great for going out on Lake Ontario because they're basically unsinkable. The reason I didn't choose that is, number 1, they were expensive. Number 2,
setup time. Like you have to inflate it out in the floors, do this and do that. Like it's not hours, but it
adds up.
It's longer than having a boat that's already made.
Yeah. Option 2 was a pedal drive kayak. Pedal drive kayaks are really expensive. To get a decent one, you're spending at least $3,500-$4,000.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, like, it is what it is. My whole setup is almost that much. But the main problem with kayaks like that are they weigh a lot. Okay, so my canoe weighs 55 pounds. I can easily lift it on and off of the car by myself, no problem. Let's use a Old Town Big Water 132 that's like a very popular pedal drive kayak. That thing weighs a lot. That thing's like 120 pounds. Like it's a big boy. And I don't care how strong you are. You're throwing that on top of your car. You're gonna wreck your back or your shoulder.
It's the weight of an aluminum boat.
Yeah,
almost. Like
so a lot of guys put them on trailers for a good reason, because they're dang heavy. I'm not saying you can't put them on top of your roof. Lots of people do. There's lots of ways to put it on top of your roof, but it is a big, heavy boat and expensive, $4,000. So I'll ask you the question: if I said to you, here's $4,000, you have to buy a pedal drive kayak, which you have to pedal all day long, stable. It's a nice boat, really good boat, or I'm going to give you a 14-foot. Really light canoe with a gas motor on the back, a trolling motor, a battery, a fish finder, and all the accessories you want for less than $4,000. Which one are you going to pick?
100% canoe.
Yeah,
100%.
And it's more versatile. I can use it camping. I can do this with it. I can put 3 people in it if I want.
That's a big determining factor, I know, for you too, because we fish a lot together. He had his older kayak at the time when he was looking for the sports pal, and he can only go out in that, which is nice, stable platform. You can stand up and cast and whatnot. But
I'd have to leave him at home. Yeah.
And I was getting real upset at him. So I told him, you need to get something that can sit me as well.
Yeah. And it's good because like the sports
completely
pal,
his expense. So
yeah. So like I was really, and I am going to eventually get a pedal drive kayak, because that's something like living near Lake Ontario. There's lots of options for somewhere where you could have a bigger kayak, but you want to bring someone else. Like my wife, I take my wife fishing. I take my father-in-law fishing. I take Andrew fishing all the time. I have 2 nephews that I take fishing all the time. I want to have that option to bring someone else. I don't want to be like, oh, sorry, man, I have this sick kayak, but you can't get in there.
Yeah.
And
I love fishing
pros and cons.
with people, with friends.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That being said, like there are pros and cons of getting a canoe. Like it does limit where you can go, but that's why I chose the Sports Pal. And,
So with Sports Pal, do you know when Sports Pal, the company, started?
I want to say like the 40s.
Yep, 1940s.
Really?
They
wow.
started.
I'm smart.
They started in Canada, and then they got bought and started being made in the U.S., and now they're back being made in Canada again.
Yep.
And the reason why they're light is it's aircraft grade aluminum, so it's thinner gauge than what some of these other aluminum boats and stuff like that are made of, but you're getting something that's still quite durable, easily repairable, and very light, because this is the same stuff they're putting on a plane that's floating in the sky. So, and like I said, it comes with different sizes, different lengths.
Yeah, so you can get 12 foot, 14, and 16 in 3 different configurations. So honestly, your brother got the 16 foot. Originally, I was going to get the 16 foot. I went to
I don't remember
the place in Port Perry. I forget the name. I'll link it down below, but it's called Freedom Canoe and Kayak.
Yes.
And I went there, and the guy Mike, amazing to deal with, amazing customer service. And he asked me, why you want the 16? And I was like, oh, I just want something a little longer. And he's like, dude, look at the 14, you won't want the 16, believe me. He's like, don't get the 16. And he talked me out of it. I'm so glad he talked me out of it, because the 14,
so much more manageable.
it's so much more bigger than you'd ever expect.
Yeah.
You sit in that thing, you're like, this is huge.
And with the full transom, you get a lot of storage all the way to the back, whereas most of the time with the canoe, it's pointed at the front and back. Being as wide as it is in the middle, all the way straight to the back, is a lot of space. A lot.
Now, that being said, if I only used it for camping, I'd get the 16.
Yeah.
But for fishing, 14 is fine. The 16 is not more stable than the 14. It's just longer.
Yes. So that's kind of the reason why the Sports Pal, like, that's a great option. 100%. If I was to recommend to someone, hey, I want to get into fishing, I want something that's, stable to fish out of, that is probably the most adept fishing canoe I've ever been in. Because
100%.
you can stand, which is really useful. You can do some of the techniques like flipping and pitching and push into the weeds and go for bass, whereas in my canoe, it's Algonquin 16 Swift canoe, great canoe, but if you try and stand in that thing, you're going to be going over pretty soon. Like we have, you can like adjust yourself, but one person stands at a time and the other person has to be like super like rigid, so it's not like getting...
Do you know how wide your canoe is?
I don't know exactly how wide.
My guess would be probably like 33, 34 inches.
Yeah.
And my canoe is, I think, 38, 39 inches wide.
Yeah.
And some of the most stable kayaks are like 40 inches wide.
The big difference, too, between his canoe and mine is the hull shape. Mm-hmm. So mine has, I forget exactly what there's I found it really interesting to research it, but there's initial stability and then there's like end stability essentially. So the hull shape on his, because it's very flat, has a very strong initial stability. You can stand up, you don't feel like you're wobbling at all. If it starts tipping, very easily that will go past the tipping point of no return and then go. Mm-hmm. So if he starts to tip, he's going in. On my canoe, it's more of a rounder hull shape. So it's a bit more wobbly to begin with. So it's going to have movement side to side when you're in it. But if you're tipping over, because the edges kind of curl in as well, you can be on a pretty strong angle in that canoe before you're at risk of it actually flipping. So there is a difference between that. But again, if you're standing up, you don't have the initial stability. You feel unstable, 100%.
Yeah.
But Swift Canoe, it started in 1988. So it's much more recent than Sports Pal was. And they actually split off of Algonquin Outfitters, which is still running up on Algonquin Park. So Bill Swift split off from there and started the company, Swift Canoe. I wanted something Canada made and I was looking for it. And again, something light, something that was geared for Algonquin Park. So I got one that literally said it on the canoe. But yeah, so we fished out of that. And it's funny, like we used to fish a lot from shore, or growing up, my dad had a fiberglass boat. So I'd fish out of that and went camping and whatnot. But being out in big water, or like a fair sized lake in a canoe, especially my canoe, because again, you're feeling it always moving. I know we were fishing a lake in Algonquin Park, and we actually we made some fishing lore that came out of this. So we were paddling back, we were night fishing, and Jesse has his fish finder there in the boat, and we're going along. Now it's one thing to be like the dark doesn't bother me. I love being in a canoe in the dark. That's completely fine. The water's like glass, the moonlight's coming down. What gets weird and makes me feel uneasy is when you look at the fish finder and see that you're sitting at 180 feet of water. And you're like, if for some reason I don't float, I'm sinking 180 feet to the bottom of this like black depth of like,
lagoon.
It's insane. So it's a little unnerving to think of that. And so Jesse and I came up with a cryptid creature that would be in the lake, helping and also dragging anglers down to the depths if it wasn't accepting of their sacrifices.
Let's just say we were sober when we came up with this, just as a heads up.
So the creature is called the Opeonga Killer. It is a large turtle-like creature with a massive shell, often mistaken for islands in the Algonquin Lake system. But it does have a musky head and a muskrat tail. It helps in its propulsion.
Yep.
So this, whenever we're going around and if we catch a big bass or something like that, it's always a blessing from the Opeonga Killer. Or if you happen to lose a good fish, or you get a hook in the hand, or you're just losing baits all morning, that's the Opeonga Killer taking its sacrifices.
Yep.
But it will reward you.
Maybe if you're good.
But yeah, so we may reference the Opeonga Killer. We reference it pretty much every time we go fishing. But
yeah, it's just one of the weird things that me and Andrew
if you ever hear that name being thrown around in one of our videos or anything like that, at least now you know where its origins are from. And be on the lookout, people. It's real.
It's real. If you see a big hump on your fish finder the size of a football field, it ain't no hump. That's the Opeonga Killer.
So that's that one. I know we're gonna be looking forward to trying out the new canoe, or the new kayak he's gonna pick up there, the D1. And then we also you're looking to get another pedal drive, like you said.
2024 is gonna be good. My wife and me talked, and I'm gonna get a big water pedal drive kayak so I can start targeting some Lake Ontario fish in the depths and some big northern pike. It's gonna be good.
That's a great segue, because you're talking about fishing big water. So the next question I wanted to address is, how can you be safe about fishing in canoes, in kayaks? And for me, it's being aware of the report. Like, we've gotten caught in some pretty bad weather. We were fishing on an offshoot of Lake Ontario, and you looked at the weather, it's like, oh, it looks good, not too bad. Wind gusts, not too bad. Mm-hmm. But that forecast changed, and we were fishing out there, and we could not turn my canoe back into shore. We actually had to put it aside some random stranger's house, because we knew we were gonna flip if we tried to get back. We couldn't even get back.
There was like
to the launch.
5-foot waves came out of nowhere.
It was insane. So
we were filling with water. It was bad.
It was like great fishing up until that point.
Oh,
but
amazing.
But you always have to be aware. So when we saw the clouds roll in, we thought we were taking a preemptive strike at it too, and it on the way back it just was getting worse and worse and worse. Sometimes camping in the parks, you have a day where it's going to be, it looks completely fine, but all of a sudden the day you have to leave, there's a windstorm, and I've had to canoe back in 3-foot waves crashing over the bow, and you're trying to push through it. It's not fun.
Yeah.
Can it be done? 100%.
Oh, for sure.
But you have to have your wits about you.
And common sense.
So I would say, I figured I'd talk about the canoe, how to like canoeing. Like kayaks, I know they're more stable. So I'll let you talk about some of the, some of the water that people can do kayaking in.
Yeah. So like, I think if you see there, again, like you said, there's different kinds of hulls for different kinds of kayaks. So like, for instance, I'll use Old Town as an example because they're a very popular brand. Say you're getting a pedal drive, they have the big water 132. It's not as wide, but it's got a different hull, so it handles big water better. Is it as stable as the wider 12-foot pedal drive version, which is literally probably more than 6 inches more wide than the big water? Everyone's like, oh, this canoe's wider, it's more stable. It may be more stable when you're standing in calm water, but when you're going through waves and stuff, the thinner canoe handles it better. So I'd say our best advice, like you said, is keep your eye on the weather. Like we have a wind app now.
Wind is very important.
Make sure you check, because like you don't want to be caught offshore really far.
Yeah.
And I'd say if you're just getting into fishing out of a small craft, stay close to shore.
Yeah.
Don't go far out in the lake or anything like that.
Choose smaller lakes where the wind won't be as much of a factor. Even on calm days, that constant wind will increase and will build that wave to be a pretty substantial size. So if you can fish like the sheltered side of the lake where the wind's coming from, so you're not fishing the windswept side of the lake, that's great. Fishing, you can kind of hunker around down by peninsulas or in bays where they're a lot more sheltered, so you're not spending all your time out there in the rough water. I know with canoe fishing, or like in rough water, I know I've had it on Lake Simcoe. I've flipped it on Lake Simcoe. I've had it on, rivers, no issue. Like it doesn't get very windy on the rivers. So all depending on what you're looking to do with it, you can be safe. But wind, I would say, is the largest determining factor. You can go on big water on the right day, 100%. But guys, they take kayaks out in the ocean.
Yeah, like the Gulf of Mexico.
They do it all the time.
They're designed to do
the salmon derby they run in the fall and the end of summer. A lot of the guys out there, they have a whole section of guys that is just canoes, right?
For the kayaks.
Kayaks for the salmon derby. So it's all these guys in kayaks out on Lake Ontario fishing. That's big water, and guys are out there on rough days too.
Yep.
But again, when you're prepared for those conditions, you're good. If your craft is not, then don't go out. It's better to be safe than sorry.
And of course, always wear a life jacket in any situation. Even on calm days, like it's easy not to wear them. We see a lot of people not wear them, but if you're in a boat by yourself, especially, you should 100% all the time be wearing a life jacket.
Yeah.
People do die every year.
And if it's a nice, calm day and you're out there in a canoe, how many times have we been fishing in a canoe and these giant boats, like courtesy, for anyone listening, courtesy is if you're in a canoe, the larger craft will slow down and pass you calmly so that they're not sending this massive wake out behind them that is at risk for you. That is kind of lost courtesy nowadays that we've found so many times. We're out in my canoe and your canoe.
The older guys and girls, they know what they're doing.
But there's so many times these young guys come along in like a wakeboarding boat, super deep V, and it's sending a 2.5 foot wake out the back, and they're just flying across the lake, like 30 feet from you.
Yeah,
like,
they'll go
super
right
close.
beside you,
Even jet skis, they're ripping around super close. All that stuff, it's not natural waves coming at you, but these wakes, they can come at you and they can flip you easily. If you don't have your canoe pointed directly at them, they're hitting your boat or your kayak broadside, and there's a very high chance you're going over with a wake coming along.
And so even if you go straight on, like for instance, I was fishing on Trent River with Zach, and we were going in the sports pelt. We were going up the river, and this guy whipped by us within, I'd say, 30 feet in a bass boat, and he whipped right by us. Huge wave came at us. I managed to turn the boat just in time. We still half filled with water.
Yep.
And the guy just like waved as he went by. It's like, don't you get what we almost capsized this.
Yeah.
Like I could have lost everything just because they're too dumb to slow down or they don't care.
So choose your areas carefully where you're fishing.
Yeah.
If you're going to be in, if you're a cottage or wherever you normally launch or where you want to go canoeing or kayaking, if it's on a very busy body of water with a lot of big boats, just be cautious. Be aware that they're there.
Give them their space.
You give them their space, and hopefully they'll give you yours as well. And the other thing too, watch some videos on different paddling strokes. I know with kayaking, there are a few you can use. With canoeing, with their standard paddle, there are a lot of different paddle strokes that can be used in order to be much better at maneuvering your canoe. Even looking at, I remember I was watching videos on, shooting rapids and stuff like that, because I've done that a couple times. Just, not crazy ones. It's definitely fun, but you have to learn how to read the water, and then also how to paddle. So if you're paddling a canoe or a kayak in calm water, it's dead easy. Anyone can do it. But then if you have waves and you have to, like I said, get back from your campsite back to your car, and it's 2-foot white caps blowing out there.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that you're paddling on the right cusp of the wave, or else you're leaning over too far. You're not putting the power where it needs to be to get that forward momentum on those waves, and you're at risk. You're at greater risk. So even learning how to paddle effectively, doing the pull, doing the pry, that can move your boat side to side on wherever you're paddling from. That stuff can make a huge difference on your safety on the water, just to be knowledgeable about and experienced, at least somewhat, on how to do those things, to know when to use those different methods, because it's coming in handy for me when having to, like I said, boats ripping by you and you got to pull your back end of your canoe over really quick. Using some of these, not your standard just paddling stroke to do that is fantastic. And even using some, like the J stroke is what I often use when I'm paddling on my own, just to get a nice trolling speed of the canoe, and you're not constantly flipping side to side. So there's lots of stuff that is just beneficial for ease of fishing, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely, there is some skill involved and some practice in being effective in paddling.
You've done some modifications to your canoe.
Yeah.
Besides just putting on, different gear, whatever you want, having a fish finder on, having your depth finder, having a motor or whatever. I know Jesse's put in some extra bars coming across so we can mount those accessories to them.
Yeah.
You've altered your transom for more support so you can mount your trolling motor better on the side. I know for my canoe, I even built a little transom that mounts onto the gunnel so I can put a trolling motor on my canoe, which is not a flat back at all. So that kind of stuff is something that you can always modify to make it a little bit better if there's something that, you want to have something that you're paddling, but that one time a year you're going to be putting a motor on it. You can actually buy special transom mounts that are built for canoes that you can then put your little trolling motor on it. It's fantastic. I've seen guys, they make a catamaran. They take 2 canoes and they clamp some big 2x4s across both, and they put a motor in the middle. Like, that's stable as anything. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with your craft if you feel the need to have to modify a little bit. And again, as long as you're smart about it, you're not going to cause any damage to it or any serious repercussions.
Yeah, and if obviously if anyone has any questions about any of the boats that we have, the Sports Pal, the other boat, obviously send us a message on Instagram or on our YouTube channel, and we'll get back to you. We will be filming. We didn't really film a lot last year. I know a lot of people asked me about filming the Sports Pal video we've been talking about for a while with all the modifications and top speed and all that stuff. That will be done this year. This year we're actually focusing more on making content. Last year we got busy, but it's going to happen this year. But there will be a lot of videos coming out with that kind of small craft topics. So we're looking forward to that.
Excellent. So I believe you've got some questions that we had requested from our Instagram followers. So if you ever want, follow us on Instagram, Average Ontario Anglers. On our stories, we'll sometimes post requests for a question. So like I said at the beginning of the episode, everyone who's posted a question for this has been entered into a raffle that will be announced. The winner will be announced on the next episode. So be sure, follow us, have a share. That puts you in the running for, even if we don't say your question, if you enter one for us, that puts you in. So.
And the prize for this week is a Jackal re-range jerkbait, one of my favorite jerkbaits. So we'll be posting that on our story so you can see what it looks like if you've never seen them. But They are really, it's that one with the long cast, bearing that
I don't
snaps in
have
with the
one.
magnets.
And Jesse has he's beaten me a few days with that.
I've used a lot of jerk baits, and it's a very good jerk bait.
Yeah.
It's really good for smallmouth, pike, everything like that. But anyway, just as a heads up for if you own a brand or you make baits or something like that, if you would like to sponsor a giveaway, we would be happy to do that. If you are interested in that, you can shoot us a message on Instagram or email us. Here's some of the questions that are going to be added into the draw. Everyone who asked a question will be added into the draw. We can't go through them all. We actually got over 50 questions today. I was actually blown away. I was like, wow, that many people have questions for us. So I'm just going to go through, and we're going to answer them very quickly because unfortunately we're already going over time. But me and Andrew will kind of switch through, and we'll answer them quickly. If you want more depth on our answer, just send us an Instagram message, and I'm sure one of us
DM
will.
us directly.
Yeah, because I mean, with these 50, we could do a whole podcast on that. Okay, this one's for Andrew. Pike fishing, under or topwater fishing?
More effective underwater, but I love seeing pike hit something on the topwater like 7 times before they get hooked, and just see them like spin wheel out of the water. But I had to say, for effectiveness, 100% subsurface.
All right, here's another one. Blackfly lure. Oh, sorry, that was Snid 686. Okay, this is Blackfly Lures. He asks, what does Andrew do to keep that mustache so fierce?
So I actually use a little bit of beard oil. I thought these were fishing questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, nothing much. It just grows luxuriously.
All right. Poorly made musky memes. Follow this guy if you like funny musky fishing memes. I find them pretty entertaining. I'll answer this. What's the best advice you give to a novice angler? Number one, I'd say is be patient, put in the work, and don't get too caught up in all the gimmicks. Just keep it simple, put the time in the water, and you will catch fish. Will Morris 8 says, who catches bigger fish? I guess that really depends, okay?
Depends on the species.
It depends on species. Like some fish, Andrew has a way bigger PB, some I do. It's kind of split. So I'd say both of us. It depends on the day, really.
Yeah.
This is Damien. Pick a pike pattern, all white or fire tiger?
Fire tiger,
100%.
Yeah.
The perfect jig. Brendan asks, when is my podcast invite? We actually have a bunch. I was surprised before this podcast even came out. I had very many companies and people ask me to be host on the podcast. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do it. So Brendan, we'll get you in there for sure. Brendan is very knowledgeable about bass fishing, and obviously the Perfect Jig company. We use a lot of his stuff, his frogs, his jigs, his plastic, stuff like that. We'll get him on there for sure. And maybe for that episode, wink, wink, he'll sponsor a giveaway for you guys. All right. Yak and Bassin, this is a question for me. To ban or not to ban forward-facing sonar or panoptics? That's a very long topic that I cannot get into. My answer is, without getting political, I don't care. I literally don't care. If the pros in the pro circuits want to eventually ban it because it's unfair, whatever, I don't care. If you use
they said depth finders are unfair back. Flashers are unfair back in the
new
day.
Technology always angers the old guys. Doesn't make it unfair advantage. I feel like the only thing that I find unfair about forward-facing sonar is the fact that most people can't afford it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I feel like it gives some people an unfair advantage? Yes.
If others
slightly.
don't have it, yes.
You still have to catch the fish, though.
If everyone has it on the boat, it's no longer unfair.
Yeah. All right, Andrew, what's your favorite freshwater fish to cook and why?
I would have to say I like pike. Pike is an underrated fish. It's not that pike. Hard to cook, like to clean. There are you have to learn a different fillet method, and then you're done. Is it different than bass and walleye? Yes, but just learn a different fillet method, and they're no longer hard to fillet.
And they taste
good.
The
meat is excellent. The meat's cleaner than the bass I usually catch, and yeah, that thing fries up excellent.
And if
beer battered pike is top notch.
And if you fish the Kawarthas, a lot of these lakes that have pike in them, they don't want pike in them because it's musky. So if you catch pike, keep them, clean them up. You'd be surprised how good they taste.
Yep.
All right, here's another question from Mark. How do you like the Garmin sonar looking at making the switch from Humminbird, but never used a Garmin? Honestly, I've never used Humminbird, so I can't speak on that, but I've owned 2 Garmin units now. They've both been really good. I'm really happy with them.
They're both very reputable brands. I wouldn't say that one really has an upper hand besides whatever technology or software they might be using. But as for...
I've never had an issue with
They're both durable.
They're
both, They're both very well-renowned brands.
Yeah, for sure.
My dad had a very old Humminbird unit that is still running today. So that's got to tell you something.
All right. Jeremy McGregor, he asks, and here's one for you. Tips to catch cold water pike but avoid the closed season bass in the same pond.
That's a good one.
That's a hard one.
So I would say fishing the outskirts of the weed. So pike, they're often like they're both in shallow water, but I find the bass, they're a lot more sluggish than the pike are. Pike are actually cold water fish. So in the cold water, they're a lot more active. So a faster approach is going to target more pike than bass. And pike are going to be more ambushing. So they might be staging in for the spawn, but they're still ambushing prey. Bass, they're kind of staging for their spawn, but they're quite sluggish at this time. So unless you're doing finesse presentations to them, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to be catching bass if you're using something quicker. So some fast jerk baits, chatter baits,
like
stuff like that.
We've caught bass fishing for pike in like April, but not very many. Yeah. But once it gets towards like May or June, you will catch bass. There's nothing you can do about it. Yep. What are you going to do? Zach says, any new vids planned? Similar to your beginner's guide for casting for salmon, longer and informative. That is the style that I like to do. If you've ever watched YouTube and you've seen tactical bassin, I would like to be the amateur tactical bassin team. I like informative videos. I don't like videos where they're just like, watch me fish for, with an ice fishing rod for muskie. Like, that to me is stupid. I want to learn
give you
something.
Usable information too.
We do have plans, like we said before, about doing that. We do like to make those videos. What's the best tip to catch the fish of 1,000 casts? Why don't you take that one?
Don't give up. Cast 1,000 times.
It's actually 10,000 casts. So just as a heads up. So my tip would be cast a lot more than 1,000 times.
I would say just doing research on locating them. It's not that they're hard to catch. They're hard to locate. Once you're there, it's learning the technique of most of them. I know Jesse was teaching me a lot of. Most of them hit right when it hits the water, shortly after, or at the boat. So every cast, make sure you're figure eighting. I know when I caught mine on the figure eight, I did not see that muskie at all.
Came from underneath
right
the boat.
There,
and I guarantee it followed
first turn, and then I saw it turn, and it was there. Like, it blew my mind
right at the last minute.
Yeah. So figure eight after every single cast. Don't get lazy with that, and find out where you can locate them on the water. Just general rules, and focus your time on those areas.
All right. Bass Addict 85. I'll answer this.
Disclaimer: I'm not a muskie expert.
You've caught some good ones though. Okay, Bass Addict 85 says, what was your most used setup for bass last season? Rod, reel, line, lure, tons. But I'll say one setup that I did really good with is, I'm not going to name brands or anything because it doesn't really matter, but a 7 foot or 7 foot to 7'3", medium heavy bait casting rod, fast action, 15-pound fluorocarbon. And I did really good with swim jigs on that. Swim jigs, Senkos, stuff like that. And I'd say for spinning rod, I had a 7-1 medium, just like a general purpose rod, 10-pound braid, 8 or 10-pound fluoro leader, and drop shot. Like, not really finesse drop shot, but like drop shot around weed edges and stuff. I did really good for that. What about you?
I actually made a goal not to use my spinning rod very much at all last year.
You didn't?
And,
I was surprised.
Awesome. So I have a BFS, kind of a budget BFS, and I was using that in place of a spinning rod. So not true BFS stuff, but casting lighter baits. And I had a lot of success with that. So that's, super light action. I had 10-pound braid on there, fishing all these small baits. I had a lot of success with that. Little topwaters. I love fishing little topwaters on that. And then my other one, same as Jesse, except instead of fluorocarbon, I like to run braid on a lot of stuff. So I was running, I think it was 35-pound braid on mine. But very similar. Yeah, medium heavy bait casting rod, about 7 feet long.
You can't go wrong with a medium heavy, but we'll get more into that. You can do
anything with that, pretty much.
Julian asks, if you had to target one fish for the rest of your life, what would it be and why? And we'll make this quick.
Smallmouth, just because they're a blast to catch, and they're in so many different areas.
True.
Depending what lake you go to, they're all over the place. What about you?
Smallmouth would be a good one. I want to say largemouth, but I also want to say northern pike.
That's another good one.
I'm going to say northern pike because I feel like if you just targeted northern pike and fished for the big ones, it would be very rewarding because everyone fishes for bass.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get more into that after. A lot of them are, what's your favorite freshwater fish? A lot of the questions are the same. Paul says, favorite way to catch largemouth?
Frog.
Okay, frog for sure. To be fishing, Bobby asks, what's one bait you want to catch a muskie on, but you haven't yet? For me, a Medusa. I'm just saying because normally we use like bucktail, spinnerbait, suic, stuff like that. And I've used the Medusa quite a bit. And I had a few fish follow, and it's just one lure that I just want to hit. And I know it's not really an exciting bait to catch it on, but a Medusa. I've caught muskie on topwater. I've caught them on the usual stuff, but for me, and not just a small one, a big Medusa, like one of those big 1-pounders. That would be awesome.
You know what I'm gonna say, Jesse. I I have an old pikey chub jointed minnow that my brother-in-law Jacob gave me, and this bait is, I don't know, from the 60s. It's chewed up, and the action in the water is amazing, and I've been wanting to catch a muskie on this. I've had a couple follows.
You had a follow last year.
That was a good fish too.
Yeah. I had at least a 45-incher come right to the boat, and then just as soon as it saw him, because the
so
water was
clear,
it just like shot away.
But that's on my rod about half the time because I'm like determined to catch a muskie on that.
Here's a good question, and I'll answer this. Carson says, when do you use a mono versus a fluoro leader? Okay, so very quickly, we'll get into this in another episode about fluoro, which we're going to do. But I feel like the industry standard of only using fluorocarbon leaders is a big scam. I feel like fluorocarbon is good for certain situations, but it's not needed in a lot of situations. Like if you fish like a Kawartha Lake that's like murky, lots of weeds, believe me, the fish don't care if you're using fluoro or mono.
Or straight braid.
So like I actually prefer to use mono leaders, and I use that Maxima Ultra Green, just like Matt Allen on Tactical Bass, and not that matters, but he's known as using mono leaders, and he catches giant bass. Mono has more stretch. Mono is more abrasion resistant than a lot of fluorocarbons. I will use mono leaders for anywhere I can get away with it. Unless the water's gin clear, I'm not using fluorocarbon. It's not worth the money. Yeah. That's my thought. Again,
we're gonna get a lot more.
We're gonna get a lot more
on a future episode. We have plans for that already. So.
Yeah. Favorite color of worm craw if you could only have one?
Worm, I'd probably say like the pumpkin seed, like the white and green. Okay. I like that mix. Very natural colors. What about you?
I'd say green pumpkin. I'm happy with.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Green pumpkin and black and blue. You can't go wrong with either. Green pumpkin I could use 90% of the time, depending on the lake. And that was Bassman 140. Okay, Irish Angler Ontario says, what are your most consistently reliable lures in Ontario for Ontario bass? I'll do one, then you do one. Okay, chatterbait. Half ounce.
That was mine.
3/8 or a half ounce green pumpkin or white chatterbait with just a simple trailer in the back will catch anything. Walleye, bass, pike, muskie, doesn't matter.
I would say the Rattling Wrap is one of the most versatile crankbaits, like lipless crank you can use, and I've had a lot of success with those over the years for multi-species.
Yep. Drop shot will catch bass in any lake in any situation. You can drop shot, super light line, super finesse baits all the way up to like punching through like mats with like a heavy duty like Bubba shot. So I'd say that. But definitely chatterbait would be way up there for me.
Chatterbait. And I'd have to say like swim jig or flukes are fantastic as well.
Yeah.
I have lots of success in the fluke.
AV angling. Favorite drop shot bait and why? I've gone through a lot, and I'm not a big water smallmouth guy because we don't have the boat for it. But from my experience of using drop shot baits, we've used a lot. I really got onto that brand Great Lake Finesse. They make some really good drop shot baits, and they're neutrally buoyant. So they literally just hover. Like the Max Scent flatworm has been like, everyone wants them. You remember there was a time when they were so backward that people were buying them for like, $30 a bag on eBay and stuff. I feel like the scent is good, but the actual bait is not very good. They're not neutrally buoyant. They just kind of hang. If you want a bait that literally just like hangs and looks supernatural, check out Great Lakes Finesse. I have no affiliation with them at all, but they make really good baits. Here's a good one for you, Andrew. What's a good bass setup?
So I would say, medium heavy bait casting rod. Bait casting is more versatile for fishing, especially if you want to go both species. If you're fishing around weeds, you want something a lot heavier than spinning. I've done it, but you are at a disadvantage unless you have a heavier action rod. 150 series bait casting reel, or even 100 series will do you fine. I like fishing braid just because, again, in those weeds and stuff like that I'm mainly fishing, I want something that can pull my lure out of there. That still has a lot of line, so when I'm fishing open water, I can still bomb a long cast and still have lots of line left on that spool. So I'd say 35 pound braid, 30 pound braid.
Yep. Medium
heavy 7-foot bait casting rod, fast action, and just a decent bait caster. You're good to go for pretty much anything out there.
Here's a good one. Are jackhammers worth the money? Now, I'll tell you really quickly. they can be. If you're a professional, oftentimes professionals use professional grade gear because money's on the line. They want everything to be perfect. Mm-hmm. If that is you, then yes. If you're someone that's very finicky about your lures, then yes. If you don't like spending $25 on a chatterbait, then no. I have 7 or 8 jackhammers. I also have tons of other brands and different price points from $7 to $25. And I'll tell you, like, I love fishing jackhammers. I feel scared when I fish them, especially around pike and muskie. Yeah. So if you fish around those kind of fish, then I would not use them, or I'd use a wire leader. But if you're fishing for bass, you don't want to use a wire leader. So the answer is maybe. But that's another topic. Here's a good one.
One last question.
Okay. Okay.
Now he has to change his mind.
2. Have you guys caught rainbows in the spring on small minnow baits?
I have.
Yeah, me too.
I caught them on a little, was it the Rebel?
Little Rebel minnow?
Yeah, little Rebel minnow.
Yeah.
And I caught one on those in the spring.
Yeah.
And that was a little drop back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you told me about that. I actually caught a pretty good one back in the day. I can't remember exactly, maybe like 15 years ago, on a little husky jerk, the little maybe 2-inch size with the 2 hooks and a little feathered treble that I had added on. Mm-hmm. A little husky jerk. And yeah, it was after trout season opened, and I was kind of twitching it through this pool, and this big 7 or 8 pound bow just came up and crushed it. And I was just like, oh, fish.
Yeah.
And actually got it in. So yeah, that was a good one. Here's a good question. This is the last one. And it's a good one. There is a question, why does everyone hate Guggen? No response even needed. You know why. Okay, here's the last question. What is your vision for AOA?
I see us Saturday morning on CNN, being told that we capsized in a canoe and are now missing. No. I would say that I would like to see us being able to, continue on with this podcast. Will it be a full-time gig? I don't know if I see that in our future, but if it got there, that would be cool. Yeah. Definitely progressing more on the video content, focusing on getting our YouTube so that there's a lot more content for you viewers to see, informative videos for the average angler. That's what we're going to be focusing on more so than just our Instagram posts. We want to be a lot more informative so you can learn how to catch fish on whatever body of water is around you or what you normally go to.
Yeah, and over the last few years, yeah, we've made some YouTube videos. We've, been posting on Instagram, but this year we've actually really invested. We've invested almost $1,000 on all this podcast stuff. So we
appreciate it.
Yeah. So we are investing in it now this year, and we have things planned actually for this year, an event and fishing tournament coming up and stuff like that. That is still in the works. So we'll talk about that more in a days coming. But yeah, there are stuff for the plans. It's a hobby. We enjoy it, but it's going to get to the point where something has to come out of it where we could, supplement our income so that we can actually work less and start fishing more. So that is our plan.
If this can help pay for our hobby, which is anyone out there listening knows fishing is an expensive hobby.
Yeah. And
if this can help support us in that,
we ain't got no pro staff. So, and again, like we'd mentioned, we do have a lot of followers. We do have a lot of people that listen to our ramblings. Yep. If you are someone that would like to, we're not affiliated with any company, but if you would like to sponsor a giveaway on our podcast, we would be happy to arrange that. And in turn, you would get some
advertising
on the podcast.
You're going to be named on our podcast probably multiple times throughout. But
so we've had several offers already that we've been thinking about. But if you're interested, please send us a message.
And it's not a continue. You can do a one-time sponsor of an episode if you're interested. But so just before we sign off, tell them where we can find us, Jesse.
All right. So our podcast is going to be on Spotify, Apple CarPlay, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, and a few other ones that I'll list as soon as I figure it out. And also on YouTube, as you can see. Hi.
So yeah, thank you for listening to our episode 1. We look forward to making a few of these, well, a lot more than a few in the future.
And this episode was a bit long.
Yes.
We'll admit, because we forgot to put the timer on, but most of the episodes, as Andrew will explain, they're going to be a little shorter.
Yes, we're hoping to keep it between 45 minutes and an hour. We want to be under that hour mark so that you can listen to us on your commute into work, there and back, and kind of be done with the episode. We don't want you to be kind of stopping halfway through an interesting topic and not being able to pick it up for a week or so. So We're going to have kind of each episode being focusing on one topic. Like I said, today was canoe and kayaks. We're going to have our next episode out, I believe, is going to be on monofilament, braid, and fluoro. So that's we were talking about that. There's going to be more information on what lines are going to be used. That's going to be our next episode. And be sure as well to listen to the end of the next one for whoever wins that
Jackal re-range jerkbait.
Oh yeah, you're going to be happy.
And that giveaway is sponsored by me and Andrew's wallet.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, thanks a lot for listening. Be sure to follow us, like and subscribe if you have the opportunity.
Please write us a review.
Write us a review. They help a lot.
They help a lot, and they help us do this.
So thank you very much. Have a great day.